My name is Jenna Starkey. I'm a rising fourth-year medical student with the University of Washington School of Medicine. CMDA has been super important. I think especially those first couple years, just having local community through some of the hardships of the first 2 years, just in the classroom, learning challenging things and just being challenged through school. It was really good to have a team, a community that we pray for each other and challenge each other, but also just laugh and rejoice in the things we were going through. And then since then, the last year or so, I've been more involved on a national level, and CMDA has just been a source of inspiration and continued hope as I have been on rotations and really outside of community. It's a reminder of the people backing me and the inspiration of what I can be like or what to look forward to. CMDA just looks like any other organization you can be involved with in our busy lives, but as you get to know the people who are a part of CMDA and the amazing stories that back the membership, it's really a source of inspiration and encouragement, as well as many, many resources. But just, yeah, I think the encouragement and the support and the role models to look forward to is probably the best thing about CMDA.
Hi, this is Dr. Mike Chupp, and you are listening to CMDA Matters, the weekly podcast of the Christian Medical and Dental Associations. Well, here at CMDA, the core of our ministry happens every week in local communities and on healthcare campuses where healthcare professionals, as well as residents and students, live out the character of Christ. Just like it says in Proverbs 27, verse 17, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. Through our network of campus chapters and local graduate ministries, the CMDA's campus and community ministry is dedicated to transforming lives through evangelism, discipleship, as well as intimate fellowship. I saw so much of this community-focused ministry in action at our recent CMDA National Convention. We got to hear over and over again from our members that the community they have found within the CMDA family is the most beneficial part of their membership. You just heard such a testimony from Jenna Starkey, a CMDA student who attended our convention and shared her story with us at the beginning of this episode. Well, last week, I was so excited to announce a $300,000 matching gift provided by 13 CMDA champions. This gift came just at the right time to challenge all of us to give as generously as possible to help meet our goal this year of $750,000 by the end of June. A big thank you to every one of you who has already responded. Perhaps you've never considered a charitable donation to your CMDA. Would you prayerfully consider this today to help your CMDA claim this match and finish our fiscal year strong? Your gift of $1,000 can become $2,000. $5,000, well, it will become $10,000. Ministries like Advocacy in your state and at the federal level, Global Health Outreach, Medical Education International, campus and community ministries, and our online learning center that allows you to get Category 1 continuing education credit. Well, they would not be where they are today without the generous donations from many friends and champions like you. Please visit cmda.org/give in order to give today, or you can call us at 888-230-2637. Thank you, and may the Lord bless you greatly in every sphere of your life and work today. On our program this week, we're going to do something just a little different by featuring the work of CMDA's campus and community ministries. At CMDA, we are passionate about supporting students and residents that they might thrive and not just survive during their healthcare training. Reverend Bill Reichart is National Director of CMDA's Campus and Community Ministries, and he did a recent interview with Dr. Cara Buskmiller on our Student Pulse podcast. They discussed what residency interviews are like for Christians and others who are making decisions based upon their consciences and convictions. Their conversation will help current medical students understand better how to prepare for residency interviews and how to address challenges that they might face during their residency. It is certainly a critical topic for our medical students and other trainees in healthcare. But as you will hear Dr. Buskmiller explain, I believe our graduate CMDA members need to hear today what Cara has to say. The challenges for students and residents these days to remain true to God's Word and a Christian worldview are so much greater than anything that we faced when we applied for residency. Friends, with that in mind, whether you're a student, a resident, a grad, a family member, or a friend of any of these, please keep listening for more from Bill and Cara.
Well, welcome to another episode of CMDA's Student Pulse podcast. I'm Bill Reichart, National Director for Campus and Community Ministries here at CMDA. And my guest today is Dr. Cara Buskmiller. Cara Buskmiller graduated from Thomas Aquinas College and received her medical degree from Texas A&M, completed her OB-GYN residency at St. Louis University. And her experience in that prompted her to start Conscience in Residency, which we're going to talk about a little bit more in just a minute. But just to round out her CV a bit, Dr. Buskmiller completed maternal fetal medicine at UT Houston and is now the prenatal surgery fellow in Houston, Texas. And she's the director of research at the American Association of Pro-Life OB-GYNs. So, Cara, thank you so much for being a part of our conversation today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's a great opportunity.
Well, we had a great conversation with Dr. Monica Pataki a little while back, and she spoke on her experience with Conscience of Residency. She's a real partner and an associate with you in this work. I'd like to talk a little bit about that again from your experience, but we're going to also go into other questions about this whole process of how do you navigate the gauntlet that comes with these residency interviews, especially with some of these specialties that are a little bit more challenging in terms of conscience issues. So I mentioned in your bio, real quick, I said your residency process going to SLU had some challenges and prompted you to consider this ministry, Conscience in Residency. Would you build that out for me a little bit?
Yeah, so I graduated from medical school in 2015, and I had always planned on becoming an OBGYN. And being pro-life and a Christian, I was planning on doing OBGYN in accord with my conscience. And at that time, there was already rising tensions, amidst the profession of OBGYN. And there were many examples from even when I was in med school of people sort of being pushed out, excluded, suggested against going into OB who were pro-life or Christian and had strong beliefs related to that, and who in particular wanted to change the way they practiced from the norm based on their beliefs. So I'm acutely conscious of this. I wanted to interview well. I wanted to articulate my beliefs. I wanted to interview in a way that ensured, or as much as possible ensured, that I wouldn't be made to violate my conscience later in residency training. And I wanted to do it in a way that represented the faith beautifully and represented the truth articulately and gracefully. And I found very few resources to help me do that. I spoke with a lot of mentors who had graduated from residency a couple decades prior, or maybe 1 decade prior, who were enthusiastic about the truth, who meanwhile had joined practices which totally allowed their beliefs to flourish. For example, like Catholic-only OBGYN practices or Christian hospitals or whatever, nonprofits, FQHCs. And I felt that these people, although well-meaning and wonderful mentors and great examples in the faith, I felt that they didn't understand the boiling pot of residency interviews at this time in history, or at that time in history. Yeah. And because I thought there was no advice, I spent a long time formulating responses to questions and being prepared for questions. And I learned kind of a little bit the hard way during my interview season, how much to divulge, when to divulge, to whom to divulge, my choices and my beliefs. And I overall, now that I've seen probably 50 or 60 students go through this process, I had a pretty average to good experience, to be honest. And even during my interview season, I felt like, wow, this is going much better than I thought. But I felt that as much as possible, no other student should have to navigate things totally alone the way I did. And so later in 2015, after I had matched to St. Louis University and I had started my intern year, I started putting together this nonprofit Conscience in Residency, so that people would have a younger person who had more recently gone through the process or who's more familiar with the way that year was going as far as the process of interviewing with one's faith first in place. I wanted someone to have really good real-time resources and coaching to get you through how to say these things and how to explain these decisions.
Oh, this is such a valuable resource. And we're going to put the link in the show notes. So, we want people to visit the website and be able to reach out to you. And it's not just you doing this. You've got several other coaches. We talked to Monica. There's other people. It's a very much a pay it forward kind of process where people who have gone through this in themselves are able to help those coming behind them. In the short amount of time, you've done your residency, you've moved on. What is it like these days, today, for a medical student going through residency interviews? What are some of the challenges they're facing as of today?
Well, it's worse, is the short answer to that question, unfortunately. It's just the boiling pot on the stove, to speak, has gotten hotter and hotter. And mostly the reason for that is the transgender issue. I want to make sure that our listeners know that Conscience in Residency does not articulate any specific positions that we believe someone ought to have. We just help you in whatever choices you wish to make, articulate those to people who may sharply disagree with you. And it helps you kind of make a work plan for your residency where, program directors and your co-residents may not have any idea of how to make sure you don't have to do work that will violate your conscience. So even though Conscience in Residency has no particular choices, I made choices about not wanting to do transgender prescriptions for cross-sex hormones or puberty blockers and not wanting to participate in surgery that would move towards a surgical transition. So that was relatively easy for me to navigate because there was not a lot of that going on in 2015. There were a few select centers in this country. Now, especially medical transition and especially in pediatrics residencies has jumped off the charts, way off the charts. For myself, REI rotations in the endocrinology aspect and the pediatric adolescent gyne was mostly contraception and infertility. And now a lot of that is transgender medicine. So actually we're seeing a huge uptick in the number of peds applicants and psych applicants that speak to us. In the recent past, or when we started Conscience in Residency, it was 90% OBGYN applicants and 10% family medicine applicants and a very small, maybe 1% internal med, one person. And now it's relatively maybe a third, still a little bit overrepresented OBGYN, but it's a lot of pediatrics and psych. And we just have to help them navigate, again, just the way their OB colleagues have been doing, gracefully explain how they personally wish to avoid doing things, although they will continue to be a functional resident and a good doctor.
Yeah, it used to be if you were going in certain specialties, especially around the life issue, abortion, that this was a concern. But with the transgender issue, it's really encapsulating so many specialties. Ones that one might even not even think are on the table, but it really has. Everybody is going to be impacted in this. So with that in mind, let's talk about some practical tips, some advice, some things, you would coach as somebody would call Conscience in Residency. You'd strike up a conversation. You begin to have that interaction. What would you say to a student as they're preparing? What would you advise them to? How would you advise them to prepare for their residency interviews?
So if you reach out to Conscience in Residency for coaching, first of all, it's completely free. And we remain a resource to you throughout the rest of your professional development. So you can reach out to us during the interview season or beforehand to figure out how many programs or which programs to apply to. And then we remain a resource to you throughout residency. And we hope that you kind of, again, pay it forward, as you mentioned, and either send people to us or help us with coaching. Because our philosophy is kind of, we want to replace the ranks with people who have more up-to-date knowledge about the interview season and that dynamic. But if you reach out to Conscience in Residency to receive coaching, typically we do that over the phone because there's so much nuance that has to go into those conversations. And as much as you are comfortable, you can share with us kind of where are you academically? How competitive are you as an applicant? Because how many poker chips you have to play with really makes a difference as far as what you can negotiate and how much power you have to say, well, I would like my resume to look like this. Instead of, if you are really, you struggled academically or you're going to have a hard time, we might suggest different places for you so that your conscience will be safe. Because fundamentally, that is the most important aspect, because that's what we will be asked at on the day of judgment, not about, did we go to Harvard, Yale, or get this or that accomplishment. So we kind of, if you're comfortable sharing that with your coach, you can. You do not have to share step scores, for example. I don't think we work on that kind of point-to-point basis, but we will make suggestions about how if you're a strong academic candidate, setting a net that's perhaps more ambitious might be realistic. If you feel you're not as competitive a candidate for your chosen specialty, right? And that's a nuanced thing as well. Different specialties have different certain cutoffs and things like that. Then you may want to focus more on smaller community-based programs. Once we have that kind of conversation and an understanding of what you want for your future and where you want your future, what region of the country, for example, then we start to talk about what are your choices going to be in accord with your beliefs and your understanding of the way that the human body works. What are you choosing to do and not do? And again, we do this in a very open way. We want to help you defend your conscience. We are not in it to try and convince you of doing extra things or doing less things or whatever. Right. And then we try to help you formulate a way to understand and articulate this in interviews. For example, a few core things that we talk about with everyone, is to approach an interview with many reasons why you want to go to that program. For example, if you're going to a Christian hospital or a Catholic hospital, you don't want to go right into the interview and they ask you, well, why are you here at St. Elsewhere? And you say, well, I want to protect my conscience. I'm here because I just don't want to do anything that violates my conscience. It's a great reason, but it's not probably at the top of what they want to hear, right? They want to hear, oh, I'm here for your FQHC. I really want to work in that in the future. I'm here for your patient population. I'm here because this is a great area for families. I'm here because you have a great robotics surgery program. I'm here because X, Y, Z. You want to make sure that if they are thinking of adding you to their intern class, they want interns that are really enthused to be there for the whole program that they've built. You also want to come into the interview with an attitude of humility, right? You are, in this example of who we're coaching, you're a fourth-year med student, and the residency turns you from a med student into an attending, which is an enormous metamorphosis. And you, as the student, don't want to come in and say, I know what's best for women's healthcare. I know what's best for people with gender dysphoria. Because in truth, your church might, your faith might, your mind might, but your soul doesn't, your emotions don't, your empathy doesn't. You don't have experience with that unless you're, in a special category. Most of us typically don't walk into residency with a lot of experience. So having an attitude of humility really helps. And having an attitude of humility doesn't mean you say, well, I don't know, I mean, my faith might be wrong, but I really want to try this. It doesn't mean that you promise that you're going to convert or that you believe your beliefs are fallible. It just means I don't know everything about this topic, but I'm not quite comfortable yet with doing this type of therapy. I'd like to observe and learn, and in that observation, I don't want to dump work on other residents, but I'm interested in a program that will walk with me from where I'm at. That's a statement that is very humble. It doesn't assert more than you can as a med student, and yet it says to the program, look, I'm not going to walk in on day one and be prescribing cross-sex hormones or puberty blockers. I want you to know before I match who I am, so I'm not baiting and switching you. That's another thing we really encourage people to avoid at Conscience in Residency. As I said, you remain free as someone who gets coaching to do absolutely whatever you like. And we've had a couple people who just choose not to disclose what they are, who they are, what they're choosing. And those people, I think, have a good reasoning for that decision. They're like, I'm so much more than the things I'm saying no to. And that's true. You are you made it through med school, you made it into med school, you are a full-rounded person, you have a faith, you have a life, you have a family. You're so much more than the things you're saying no to. And it's important that you represent all the beauty that you are in addition to the things that you choose not to do. At Conscience in Residency, we believe the things you choose not to do are actually part of that beauty and part of that fullness, although most people don't see it that way. So even though some of the applicants we've coached have chosen not to disclose before match, we stress that that's probably not the right thing to do, because it might start you off on match day calling your program director saying, by the way, I have this or that, or 4 months into residency when you're about to see a patient, getting you into some hot water. And that has happened. That happened recently. We had someone who didn't disclose and we were helping them kind of walk themselves out of it. It's possible. But I think it starts things off sometimes with bitterness and difficulty. So to answer your question, some things that we speak with everyone about is know who you are and how much kind of negotiating power you have an attitude of humility, and always come into the program wanting the whole program, not just wanting to put armor around your conscience.
Oh, that's good advice. And I can just imagine how many students will benefit from this kind of discussion, to have someone like yourself who, again, has the experience, who's gone through it, who can speak with that kind of authority, has that platform. I know you offer, you have a list of some schools too, programs I should say, that are friendly and people can be aware of. I know CMDA does as well. I think APLOG does. I think a bunch of organizations do help point students to those programs. What about the flip side? You mentioned this isn't just the interview season that you're a part of a resident's life. It can go into through their residency. What do you say to students that face this dilemma? They were given certain assurances, maybe something has changed on the ground, whatever the circumstances, and now they're in a situation where now they're being pressed upon to do something that they thought they made quite clear was not going to be within the purview of what they wanted to engage with. And so, speak to that issue a little bit, Cara. How do you coach through that?
Unfortunately, we have had that happen, not on as huge a scale as I think students fear, but we have had this happen on smaller scales and in nuances that the program director didn't anticipate would be a problem. So I think the first thing to encourage the student to do is to calm down as much as possible. This is extremely important, and their fears and their worry and their anxiety are all appropriate because, as I keep pointing out, your conscience is one of the most important things that you should keep, your integrity, throughout your medical training. However, the most important thing to remember is that, hopefully, if you're, part of CMDA and you're being helped by conscience in residency, you are aided by the fullness of the truth, who is not just a list of doctrines. He's a person. He loves you. He's all powerful. So the first thing to remember is that you are not alone. You have him, and then you also have people who have been through this before. The second thing to remember is that very likely this is a communication problem. This is just a mistake. It is not a malicious thing. It is sometimes, I'm not going to lie to you, sometimes it is very much trying to get the applicant or the resident to do something they don't want to do. But that too, we have ways of speaking around that. So the most important thing is that you meet with your program director and you not be alone. You have to have an advocate, an ombudsman, and someone with you, because you cannot witness these conversations alone, as they sometimes become extremely important. I don't say that to get your tinfoil hats out. I just say that for prudence sake. The next thing to speak about is you want to understand that as a resident, there are a lot of incentives for your program to keep you. And I'm speaking mostly about financial incentives. So they are incentivized by CMS, Center for Medicaid and Medicare. They are paid by them for you, and they keep some of those funds. If they lose you, they lose that. And until they replace you, they don't get that. So there are some incentives for them to keep you. Remember, that's kind of the poker chips in your corner, so that you're not completely defenseless. You should not feel as though you have to comply, otherwise you're going to be fired. You are in a vulnerable position as a resident because that is sort of the job you need to become board certified. And it's very tough and very tricky, and sometimes you could be uprooted if you have to go find another position. But 90% of the time, you do not have to do that. You should have a conversation with your program director and say, I'm sorry we didn't get to this. I didn't think that we would have to address this separately, but I want to go forward without doing XYZ, and here's the reason why. And just like we talked about at the beginning of my residency or during my interviews, that I want to be a good resident. I want to learn. I don't want to dump work on other people. I want to find a solution that will work for all of us if I'm choosing this. I think always having an attitude of a good resident who wants to be a team player helps in these conversations. Being very self-aware, right? Not being ashamed of your beliefs, but being aware that actually all of our beliefs, mine, probably people listening, they do cause some inconvenience in the machine that is the residency. So being self-aware about that, and again, not being ashamed, but being factual about it really is helpful. And then finally, always being ready to learn and be held accountable for the things the residency wants to teach you. So if they want to teach you the American College of OBGYN's guidelines on second trimester termination of pregnancy, you learn that stuff. And I think it's important for people, especially Christians who might have a natural repugnance toward that kind of thing, to overcome our repugnance. Repugnance is not a sin. Repugnance doesn't mean we are personally sinning. It's just, it's a barometer to help us avoid sin, right? But sometimes that barometer gives you kind of false positives, and you say, okay, I hate this, but I'm going to do this because this is how God is making me a pro-life Christian doctor, or insert however you want to practice doctor. And so you overcome that repugnance, you study what you ought to do. And then I encourage people, again, every person has his or her conscience, but I encourage people that you are able to counsel completely on things, even if they are against your beliefs, even if you believe they're objectively sinful. And the reason why I tell people that you can counsel completely is not because I want you to be an accessory to evil. I don't want you to cooperate in evil. There's actually a whole nuanced conversation about cooperation in evil that we have. But it's because your counseling is actually better than anyone else's, right? You alone, the Christian resident alone, or the person who believes that XYZ, insert whatever is wrong, they will counsel completely about that, right? They will describe what abortion is. They will describe what transgender hormones do. They will tell you about the risks and about the permanence of those hormones, for example. Whereas other people might say, looks like you need this. This is what our guidelines are recommending. This is how the dose starts. This is how we monitor. And they'll give very important information. But they won't counsel completely on risks and benefits. And so that's why I encourage the Catholics to counsel on tubal ligation. I encourage the Catholics to counsel on contraception. I encourage every Christian counsel on abortion, and counsel not to the extent where you're running behind in clinic, but counsel completely, and encourage your residency that you're not going to make everyone else talk to the people who want birth control or termination of pregnancy or transgender hormones. I think that goes a long way to helping people understand, okay, this resident isn't bigoted. They're not trying to get in the way. They are just trying to not do something themselves, but they won't get in the way of other people making their free choices. And again, that's not because we believe those choices are good, but it's because as a resident, your power to cause changes in those choices is extremely limited.
Great counsel, good coaching. So you said those of you that are in this coaching role who are paying it forward is, there's a shelf life to that time. You want people who have had a recent history going through the residency. Suffice it to say, you by default, you won't be doing this forever. You'll want other residents to come along behind you who are going to take the mantle. So that begs the question, Cara, what's your pipeline for getting or opportunity to have more coaches join you? I say that to say that as this becomes more known, as I'm imagining students hearing our conversation, you're going to get a lot of calls. So do you have enough coaches, I should say? What would it take for a resident perhaps listening to this conversation, because they do, to become involved in conscience and residency?
First of all, we would be super grateful if this conversation leads to more coaches. We always have fewer coaches than we'd like, because my goal, the coaches are often residents, young attendings, and fellows whose lives are still very busy. They've got little kids running around. They still are making a low salary. They are crazy busy in the first year of being an attending, et cetera. So the more coaches we have, the less the burden on each individual coach. We do not compensate our coaches at this time. So that may be something we investigate in the future. That's a possibility, but right now this is a purely pay it forward, purely for the sake of a mission. If you do want to become a coach, you simply email conscience-in-residency@gmail.com, and that's conscience spelled out. It's C-O-N science. It's a very hard word to spell. in-residency@gmail.com, and you say, I'd like to be a coach. We are looking for people, especially in pediatrics, family medicine, internal medicine, and psychiatry, who have experience getting through residency without being made to do things. You don't have to be any particular flavor of Christian to be a coach. You do have to be able to sometimes pocket your own choices and focus on the student. This is about the student or about the resident who's receiving coaching. It's not about you. And it's sometimes tricky for people to do that because, if you're joining conscience and residency as a coach, you probably have pretty strong beliefs. But we ask you to simply pray for the student or resident if you find that, you think they're in moral trouble with their own choices, and simply help them make their own choices. It helps enough to sanctify the concept of conscience. It helps the student to protect their conscience. That helps them make good choices about their conscience in the future. So that would be my plea. If anyone is listening who is eligible to be a coach, you're eligible for coaching as on the interview trail as soon as you're done with the interview trail. And in fact, you are sometimes the most valuable coach because you are, I went to this place, they were terrible. I went to this place, they were great. I should have gone to this place. Others on the interview trail said it was great. So you are actually the most valuable coach. You're not less valuable because you're an intern. You're great. So please sign up. Typically, we have people coach no more than once a month. Typically, it's much less than that. So this is not going to be something you're spending every weekend doing. However, if a request comes in for coaching, often you'll spend a couple hours with that person on the phone. Typically just once. Most people have one conversation, then they might reach out by email to clarify a couple things. So it's not a super burdensome responsibility. Again, it's not compensated, but it adds so much value. And by doing this, we can really build up the network that already exists within CMDA and ACLOG, but knit the young people in these networks really close together and build a profession that cares about doing what's right.
All right. Well, again, I hope you get a lot of responses on the coaching side, on the student side. I just think this is such a valuable ministry, especially in the times that we face. We need the community of believers, of people of faith, to support one another, to help one another along. And we just can't go this journey alone. And it's just, it's too challenging. And so I'm just grateful for you, Cara, and Monica, and others who are involved in what you're doing, and that you're continuing to push forward and press in on this opportunity. As we kind of put this conversation to a close a bit, is there anything that was left unsaid? Anything you'd like to speak to, maybe to the students direct, or anything you'd like to say as we wrap up our conversation?
I think if your listeners have a chance, they might have listened to this whole thing and said, well, that would have been useful when I was a whatever, or maybe that'll be useful to me in like 5 or 10 years. Don't forget about us. Tell your parents, tell your church, tell whoever, because the more people who know about the name, the more people who can say to their niece who's in med school or whatever, hey, I heard about XYZ. And your small ability just to spread the name, I'm not asking for donations, I'm just asking for us to be a little bit better known, because I think, unfortunately, sometimes we reach people after it would have been helpful.
Yeah, this whole conversation has got me thinking about another different level, which is outside the scope of your ministry, but I'm thinking about these undergraduate students, also the challenges they're facing in the medical school interviews that they're going to embark on.
That's right.
And we're hearing stories about that too being very challenging in its own way. So, maybe we just need to have a conversation as to what, offline, as to the kinds of tools and ways we can help and resource these students, because their challenges are similar yet uniquely different in what they're facing as well. So.
Yeah, I think for the med students, my advice is generally, you don't have a therapeutic obligation to patients yet. So just observe as much as, if you have something against your conscience, ask to observe. You literally cannot get in trouble. If you're penalized by that, they're actually breaking a rule. So we can have a longer conversation about that. But for the med students, you try to remain basically as much in secret as is prudent. And that's hard because none of us want to keep our faith a secret. But it's becoming like that. If God has in his will, you are meant to become a Christian physician who overcomes the lies that our culture is enmeshed in. One of the only ways to do that nowadays is to remain in secret for part of it. And it should be ridiculous to say that, but it's true. And so we imitate some of the early saints who, for the sake of their families, didn't submit to the lions, for example. Some did, but some chose not to for other good reasons. And that may be your path into and through med school so that God can achieve his good through you.
Well, thank you so much, Cara, again, for this conversation, for your work, your ministry. And again, we're gonna put all that information on the web, part of the show notes, so people will know how to contact you and get in touch with you as well. And again, I just want to thank you for being part of our CMDA Student Pulse podcast. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
There is such value and encouragement in staying connected with other Christians in healthcare. That's why the root of CMDA's ministry is in campus and community ministries, because you shouldn't have to face the hardships and struggles of both your healthcare training and career alone. We are here to walk alongside you and be a resource. With more than 80 local ministry groups and over 320 campus chapters around the country, you can find connection with your colleagues through CMDA. For more information and how to find a group in your area, visit ccm.cmda.org.
Well, certainly parts of that conversation were rather sobering for me to hear, and it reminds me of the scripture, you need to be as wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. And it also reminded me of so many friends and colleagues who've been serving in creative access countries where they're there to advance the gospel, but wow, do they have to be careful. Can you imagine that we would have ever arrived where we are today in healthcare for our trainees to have to be very careful about what they reveal about their faith lives? I hope you enjoyed listening to this interview and that it was as instructional for you as it was for me. You can find more episodes of the Student Pulse podcast on your favorite podcast provider, or you can find it on our website by going to cmda.org/ccm. Plus, you can find the entire family of CMDA podcasts that are available if you go to cmda.org/podcasts. You know, if you'd like more information about the nonprofit ministry that Dr. Buskmiller created, that web address is conscienceinresidency, all one word, .com. You can also find the link in our show notes today. I thought it was especially profound when Dr. Buskmiller said, "Your conscience is one of the most important things that you can keep." It's such a simple statement, but it is so powerful. And that's why one of the major focuses of our advocacy team here at CMDA is to protect your conscience freedoms in healthcare. We've joined cases like the transgender mandate on the federal level and many such cases on the state level. Plus, we engage in state legislative efforts to secure these same protections in your individual states. Our advocacy team is working with coalitions on the ground in states like Nebraska, Florida, Kentucky, Montana, and others to introduce the Medical Ethics and Diversity Act that would protect conscience freedoms for healthcare professionals in those states. I hope that you'll take a few minutes and visit freedomtocare.org. That is freedom, the numeral 2, care.org. It's the hub for CMDA's advocacy work. At that site, you'll find resources, ways to get involved, information about active federal bills that we're tracking, and much more. Freedom to Care is focused on educating, encouraging, and equipping you and others to advocate for First Amendment religious and conscience freedoms. This particular website enables healthcare professionals to uphold life-honoring principles found within traditional Hippocratic medical ethics. If you'd like more information, just again, visit freedomtocare.org. I really want to encourage you to please get involved in CMDA's advocacy department and grow your own sphere of influence on issues like assisted suicide, right of conscience, abortion, transgenderism, and many others. You know, through a network of volunteers and other like-minded organizations, we have boots on the ground across our country to fight against the legislative and cultural changes in both federal and state arenas that are facing Christians today in healthcare. We need your help to promote a Christian worldview in healthcare in all our 50 states. If you'd like to get involved, you can contact CMDA's advocacy and communications team by writing advocacy@cmda.org. By the way, if you personally have faced discrimination at work for your religious convictions, we would like to know about it, and we want to walk through that journey with you, friends. You can share your story with us anytime by writing us at advocacy@cmda.org. CMDA is increasingly called on by the national media to give perspectives on topics just like abortion and transgenderism, assisted suicide, and more. From congressional testimony to network television, God continues to open doors for CMDA to amplify the voice of Christian healthcare professionals on the critical life and health issues of our day. If you're interested, I want to encourage you to attend our upcoming Voice of CMDA media training, which will take place August 18th and 19th, 2023. This is a 2-day training and is designed to teach you how to use the media as an educational tool and to sharpen skills as a CMDA media representative. We always use real-life examples to share a proven methodology in this course that works in the most hostile situations. Plus, we will explore how advocacy and media, they work hand in hand together, and how to prepare to use your media skills to testify in your own state legislature. Participation is limited to only 12 attendees so that we might provide excellent one-on-one training. So just visit cmda.org/events. You can do that today to reserve your space.
Registration is now open for the 2023 WPDC Annual Conference. It will be held in Hilton Head, South Carolina on September 7th through the 10th. WPDC stands for Women Physicians and Dentists in Christ. This is the perfect opportunity for female healthcare professionals of all ages to connect, engage with one another, and build deep friendships as you find peace in the midst of the busyness of everyday life. For more information and to register, visit cmda.org/WPDC.
Well, if you join us next week for CMDA Matters, you will have a chance to hear from Drs. John and Angela Condi. We honored these two saints at our convention as the 2023 Missionaries of the Year. Their stories and the impact that they made serving as cross-cultural healthcare missionaries for more than 30 years in a Middle Eastern country, well, they're going to be so inspiring, I guarantee it. So make sure that you join us next week. As always, if you'd like to suggest a future guest for the podcast, you can just email us at cmdamatters@cmda.org. And if you like our podcast, be sure to give us a 5-star rating, and please share us on your favorite social media platform. Well, by now, you've probably heard about the most recent declaration by our current U.S. Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy. And that declaration is that Americans are suffering from a loneliness epidemic. Well, if you're not involved in CMDA's campus and community ministries, I hope that you'll take a few minutes and pray and reach out and get involved. The benefits of connecting with other Christians in healthcare around the country are so unique. They're valuable, and you can't find this type of community anywhere else. Through our network and local groups, this community of CMDA members can energize you to bring the hope and healing of Christ to the world. That's what matters to CMDA, friends, and CMDA matters. We'll see you next week, God willing.
This podcast has been a production of the Christian Medical and Dental Associations. The opinions expressed by guests on this podcast are not necessarily endorsed by the Christian Medical and Dental Associations. CMDA is a nonpartisan organization that does not endorse political parties or candidates for public office. The views expressed on this podcast reflect judgments regarding principles and values held by CMDA and its members and are not intended to imply endorsement of any political party or candidate.